Being from Georgia, but too young for the glory days of Georgia Championship Wrestling, I'm fascinated by the history of GCW. I've read articles that Wrestling 2, Johnny Walker, was as over as anyone could be, to the level of being an Atlanta celebrity, even being invited to the Carter inauguration, but declining because he would have to unmask. I've watched a lot of Wrestling 2 and Georgia Championship Wrestling and Mid-South.
What is this a question, or is he doing a bio on the great Johnny Walker?
He's setting it up.
Oh, setting it up.
I've watched Wrestling 2 in Georgia and Mid-South, where he was over as well, but don't get me wrong, I love watching him run wildly across the ring to get a heel, but what about him resonated so much with fans? His promo really wasn't even that coherent, and in his loose white trunks and white boots with his shapely body, he looked almost like a giant baby. What about him got him so over?
For one thing, it's all context and time period. And if you watched Wrestling 2 in Mid-South, you're watching him in the last pretty much final 2 years of his full-time career. Johnny was already in his 50s. So his physique was not going to be, Luger-like. Johnny Walker was a great worker. He was one of those guys, though. He was like George Strickland or Dr. Sam Shepard. He always looked like Dr. Sam Shepard a little bit. He always looked old in the face and was thinning in the hair even when he was young. So he was a great and experienced worker. His original gimmick was Rubber Man because he had amazing flexibility and could do all this bullshit, right? In his 20s and 30s. But he was a dependable top guy, babyface, usually in the South and in smaller territories as Johnny Walker. And then because of the degree that Mr. Wrestling Tim Woods was over in Georgia as a former NCAA champion, and he'd had gotten the big push from the 60s, and, he was kind of an institution in Atlanta. The decision was made to create Mr. Wrestling number 2 to be a tag team partner. And at the time, I think Jerry Jarrett actually was booking Atlanta at that point. I know he had always used Johnny Walker in Tennessee and used him on top, and also did use him when he was booking Atlanta on top. But I'm not sure whether he was the one that actually put the mask on him or not. I think he said he was. We will leave that alone. At any rate, you create Mr. Wrestling 2, who is then portrayed as an equal to one of the top baby faces in the history of the territory. And the mask kind of negated Johnny's one weak spot, which was that he looked so old in the face, but he could still fucking go. And the knee lift got over. And then, of course, they split him up and worked a program 1 against 2, and that got a lot of heat. And then they fucking switched 2 back or whatever the fuck. But over a period of a few years with that TV beating it to death that he's a top main event fucking guy, they even actually went so far as to announce that Johnny Walker, about 6 months before he became Wrestling 2, Johnny Walker had broken his neck in a match with Professor Tanaka and would never wrestle again. So the people, he was the last person in the world they would suspect because they thought he was paralyzed and would never wrestle again. We never heard from Johnny Walker again, which they never did. He never worked as Johnny Walker again. But good booking, good guys he worked with and against, being presented as a main event guy, and he fucking got over. And then he had a much shorter run in Mid-South, and like I said, that was at the tail end of his career, but still because of the TBS television, from the mid-'70s through the early 80s, he was over pretty much everywhere he went, just being a top name, and he was on a lot of the magazine covers and etc. So it really wasn't that inexplicable. It's just if you only watched a match or two from the last year or so he worked, you might go, And I liked the promos because he would fire up. He had a gruff voice, and he wasn't like a pretty boy baby face. One time he said, "Cornette," because the loser was going to get 10 lashes, right? After we'd whipped him with the belts. He's, "Cornette, I'm going to whip you so hard by the time I'm finished, you're not going to be able to walk, talk, or crawl." And I'm like, fuck. I'm a little nervous. And plus, when we whipped him every night, he was getting fucking hot. So I stayed away from him. When he, in any of those spots where it was like he almost gets you, I made sure almost was an extra couple of feet. Because, Johnny was getting hot, right? He was getting the shit whipped out of him.
What did you think in Mid-South when all of a sudden after the heel turn on TA, he announced that he was no longer Mr. Wrestling 2. He was now Mr. Wrestling because he's 2 to nobody. And of course, they brought Hercules Hernandez in as the new Wrestling 2. But what'd you think when, after all these years of being Mr. Wrestling 2, all of a sudden he's just Mr. Wrestling for that brief period of time?
Well, JR had told a story, and I hope I'm getting it right, that they were discussing turning Magnum heel. And whether it was Bill Watts or Bill Dundee, because Dundee was the booker at the time, but of course Watts, came up with a lot of stuff. So JR kind of interceded and said, wait a minute. Johnny Walker is really an old grumpy guy. He doesn't like meeting the fans anymore. He's at the end of his run. He's ready to retire. He doesn't, like I say, he doesn't do the traditional babyface smiling, happy talk with the fans. I mean, it's not like he's a complete prick, but just here you got this grumpy old man that could be a believable grumpy old fucking heel. Turn him, and it helped get Magnum over even more as a babyface, and that's what they did, and it worked, and I thought that fit the fucking thing perfectly, because after all that time, he becomes just Mr. Wrestling, because I have no number, no peer, or whatever. It was just part of the heel deal, and I think it would have done better. Of course, there was the famous knee lift that killed New Orleans. His run as a heel would have worked better, because he turned so that he could work with Junkyard Dog and take the North American title off of Dog and send Dog out of Mid-South for 90 days, where he'd come back as Stagger Lee for the program with the Midnight Express and the Last Stampede and blah, blah, blah. And 2 is going to load his knee and get the $1 million knee lift that's been his finish for, all these years with a piece of metal or something in his knee pad or whatever the fuck, and it's going to get all this heat, and he's going to beat Junkyard Dog in the middle of the ring in New Orleans. Fans are going to riot. But I saw the tape. He hit Dog with a knee lift. It was fine. Bobby Eaton used to cut flips and fly over the top rope with it, but Dog at that time was overweight, unmotivated, and potentially chemically altered. And he just did kind of like a fucking slow motion timber. And it looked phony as fuck. And the people just went, ooh. And not only did the program not draw any money after that, but to be honest, I think that was the end of New Orleans as a really hot town and territory. And then Dog left for the WWF, and that's the only town that we had a few good houses, but we never really got that town back. In the record year in Mid-South of 1984, the town that put them on the map was except for the Superdome, was probably one of the worst big towns they had.